Jesus is alive. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Today for my sermon, I'm actually just going to be sharing a devotional with you. Again, I was really careful to not use these devotionals from our book that we've been using called Good Enough by Kate Bowler and Jessica Ritchie, because I know many of you have been reading those, and I hope, at least from what I'm hearing, really enjoying those, and again with Haley's Bible study as well. But today I'd like to read one from that devotional book. It's called A Good Gardener. A proud British gardener named Steve Owen specializes in prize-winning breeds of snowdrops. This galanthophylle pulled a pot from the shelf, white petals dangling downward as if to drip from the delicately green stalk. Beaming, he described how this was the first time this plant had ever blossomed after 14 years of tending it. Most of the time, it has been a fight to keep it alive. Hallelujah, he declared joyously. Gardening requires a certain kind of hope, envisioning new life in the midst of despair and death. Gardeners toil and trowel, pluck and prune, all for a single bloom. The very act of gardening is one of hope, and it's the exact kind of hope that a woman was hunting for that first Easter morning. The sun hadn't peeked over the horizon yet. The greenish haze of the moon offers barely enough light to move about, and according to John's Gospel, Mary Magdalene is awake. Grief does that to you. A day stretches into night. The moon chases the sun into the day again. The circadian rhythm cannot win against the restlessness of an unsettled mind or a broken heart. Days before, Mary's beloved friend and teacher was murdered. The Sabbath meant burial preparation had to be left unfinished, and as soon as the clock released her, Mary made her way back to the tomb. But when she arrived, the stone had moved. Jewish custom took seriously the first 7 days of grieving, so to strip people from enacting final acts of love would have been a cruelty to fragile mourners. Even the Gentile grave robbers would have left the body behind out of respect. She takes off to find Peter and John, who confirm her fear. The body is missing. And yet the bed has been made. The pieces of cloth they swaddled him in are perfectly folded in his stead. Undone by the layered grief, the men don't linger but head home. First, they lose their teacher and friend. Now his body has been desecrated. It is too much for anyone to bear. I wonder if they try to get Mary to come along, to leave this place of death and get some sleep. The bags under her bloodshot eyes must have given away her exhaustion, but instead she stays, posted at the last place she saw Jesus, like a soldier keeping watch. She peers inside the tomb again. This time it isn't empty, but she doesn't see who she's looking for. The two people dressed in white sit where Jesus once lay. Why are you crying? A rather heartless question to ask in a cemetery. Heaving through sobs, she tells what's wrong. They've taken him. Then turning to leave, she nearly bumps into a man with dirt under his fingernails. He too asks her, "Why are you crying?" Through tear-blurred eyes, she mistakes him for the gardener and begs him to tell her where Jesus' body is. What a strange detail. The resurrected Christ is mistaken for a gardener. Maybe it's because he borrowed the gardener's clothes since his were stripped and gambled over. Maybe because where Jesus was crucified was a garden, a tiny, beautiful detail that reminds us that death is never too far away from new life. Maybe Jesus looks like his dad, the first gardener, who tended Eden barefoot. Maybe Jesus looks like the new Adam, the head gardener for the new Eden of the new heavens and the new earth. Maybe it's because he carries the pruning shears of a vine dresser, the careful tender of our souls, ready to pluck and plant, uproot, and cut back. Maybe he looks ready to cultivate new life, to pull us towards resurrection with his fingers digging in among the worms. Or maybe this gardener looks like he knows something about hope. Hope that Mary desperately needs. A gardener knows the kind of hope it takes to sow a seed in the ground, to cover it with manure, to bury it in the cold winter dirt surrounded by naked trees, to leave it be for months, trusting that with the magic amount of water, air, and time, something new will be born out of a single seed. A seed doesn't taste very good or have any real nutritional value. It really has no purpose until it's planted by a good gardener or farmer. Yet inside a tiny seed is all the genetic information needed to grow into a complete plant. And under the right conditions, this tiny speck will sprout and root and bud and bloom. What grows might provide food or shelter or awe. Sometimes a giant sequoia or a bush weighed down with juicy raspberries or a flamboyant peony. But the first step to creating life from this insignificant genetic package, you must bury it. A seed reaches its potential only when it's buried. When things look most lost, most dark, most covered, most long gone, most hopeless, that's when the seed is undergoing the most important change. Through its death, it might produce much fruit. Seeds must be buried, and some even need more drastic circumstances to allow for new life to burst through the thick seed coat. Some need to be exposed to almost freezing temperatures before they'll germinate. Sequoia seeds germinate only when burnt. Some seeds, when ballooned with water, finally burst open. Some when they are kept in pitch black for a long time. Hard-shelled seeds must be scarred, cracked, or manually broken open. Some need to be eaten by animals and released. And still others must sit dormant, must sit dormant for several years before something mysterious triggers them to sprout. And that first burst of life that breaks through the seed after it's been buried, it's called the radicle, R-A-D-I-C-L-E. And no, I had to look this up, by the way. This gardener knows that the hope it takes to believe that through death and through the freezing and through the fire and the floods and the darkness and the crushing and the consummation and the waiting and thinking of all the things that have happened in your life as well, even there, new life can be born. This is the radical moment of new life bursting forth from seeming death. Gardeners are delighted, yes, but not surprised, right? They know what can grow out of a cold, hard winter ground. And while spring may be predictable to gardeners, resurrection is not. But this gardener knows something about that, though. Mary doesn't recognize that the gardener is Jesus, not until he calls her by name. Like a gardener who can name every variation of plant growing in his plot or her plot. What is it about this voice that feels so recognizable? What is it about your name on a familiar tongue that is so comforting? Finally, Mary knows. Rabbouni, she says. She exhales with a weight of despair, my dearest teacher. Maybe this is what it takes and what it means to be an Easter person. To see Christ and think gardener. Not as a mistaken identity, but as a prophetic one. The seed in the ground, the body in the tomb, this is a picture of defiant hope. All of the labor and sweat and love and precious time for a single bloom. Delicate and bold, brief and memorable. I love that devotional. It's a little longer than all the other ones that she shares in the book. But I love that devotional. And I hope that whether you were just here today or whether you've been on this Lenten journey with me, that again, every time you're seeing these plants, every time you plant your own morning glories, right, and you see those, that you remember that out of nothingness, seeming nothingness, comes new life. No matter where you are on your journey right now in your life, If you're on the mountaintop and things are going wonderfully, if you're in the valley or probably somewhere up and down, right in between, I just pray again that you, every day, just reach in and find the gardener, Christ, our gardener, that again will nurture us, will love us, and that we in community together with all people, showing respect and love to all people, working together that we will grow and blossom. Alleluia, indeed.